Welcome back to the Saltworks podcast. I'm your host, Hallie Dye. We have a wonderful episode for you today. Today on the podcast, we have Joey Young, who is the International Missions Pastor at North Monroe, the church where I go, and I cannot wait to share his story, just raising a family and being a part of the local church and then eventually falling in love with international missions and how that came to be. Also just got to pick his brain on the wisdom of how can we live with a mission mindset no matter what we're doing, and how we can learn from the international church and our brothers and sisters in Christ and other cultures. I cannot wait to share this conversation with you today. It was so good. But before we do, I want to share a couple of partners with you. For those spring break trips, summer plans, running the roads for work and sports, you need to know about Chevron's loyalty program app. You may have seen people talking about it or heard on social media how they're getting discounts on gasoline. Well, this is how. It's super easy to set up, and new users will receive 25 cents off per gallon, up to 25 gallons for the first 5 uses when you download the app. Plus, each time you use the app, you are earning 5 points per gallon that can be redeemed for future discounts, ranging from 5 cents to 50 cents. You can even get additional in-store purchases for earning additional points. Right now, local users are saving about 13 cents per gallon. Best part is, the app is completely free to you and very user-friendly. So what are you waiting for? Go to the App Store on your phone, type in Chevron Rewards, and download the Chevron app to start saving today. If you or a family member find yourself in need of an MRI, CT, X-ray, or ultrasound, you need to know about Northeast Imaging. If you haven't heard, Northeast Imaging is a patient-friendly diagnostic testing facility that is doctor-trusted and patient-preferred. They are located at 1703 Lammy Lane in Monroe. Their friendly staff provides high-quality scans, focusing on the delivery of exemplary care to the patient and their referring providers. Whether you're using your health insurance or paying cash, Northeast Imaging is almost always more affordable than local hospitals. They're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So take that heavy decision off your list and tell your healthcare provider you want to go to Northeast Imaging. And now to my conversation with Joey. Well, welcome to the Saltworks podcast, Mr. Joey.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you.
Well, it's an honor to be here.
For people who don't know you, who is Joey Young?
Well, my official title is I'm the International Mission Pastor for North Monroe Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
What I tell people when I teach is that title, but I also tell them I'm the husband of one wife. We've been married for nearly 41 years.
Wow.
We have 3 sons,
Mm-hmm.
Andrew the oldest, Christopher, and then Nicholas. Each are married, and we have 6 grandchildren, 5 girls, surprisingly, and
Yeah.
1 boy.
Yeah.
So we raised all boys, and I was not fully prepared for all these girls.
Yeah.
But I'd like to think that if people look at me, they see something different because, Paul identified himself in the book of Romans as being a bondservant of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where I'd like to, at the end of my life, that's what I'd like for people to say. I mean, all of those other things are good and they're great accolades, but at the end of your life, I'd like to have represented Jesus Christ well, and I'd like for people to know that I'm a follower of Christ.
Mm. Well, for someone who's seen all of those facets of what you just said, I think that is very evident in your life. But I love that statement. That's such a great way to put it. You mentioned you've raised 3 boys and you weren't always doing missions in this way. Can you tell us about what life looked like raising boys, what you were doing before that, and how did that transition come into play?
So Lori and I moved here to Monroe in 1985. We got married in 84, and I was a youth pastor at West Memorial Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. And so Lori and I served there until the then pastor of the church, decided that he was leaving and going to South Carolina. And so when he left, what happens in a Baptist church when the pastor leaves is the people then begin to lean on whatever staff is left. And there was only myself and a music minister.
Yeah.
And so I was counseled by several people, look, you probably want to step away from this because, number one, the new pastor coming in is going to want to be able to pick his own staff. And number two, the people are really leaning on you a little bit heavy, and it was true. They were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stepped away with the intention of finishing college. I was at University of Houston. Lori was also. Lori graduated from University of Texas with a fine arts degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so I convinced her that it was probably a good idea for her to get something that you could actually earn money at, being that if I was going to be a pastor, we were never going to have very much money at all. And so she went back and got an art education degree at U of H. And so to do that, we had to move away from the church. Our parents agreed to help take care of us financially.
Yeah.
My parents were giving us $500 a month, and Lori's parents were giving $500,
Mm-hmm.
which is funny because of the apartment that we lived in cost $750 a month.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have much to live on,
Yeah.
and we were really poor. Well, it wasn't supposed to happen, but Lori got pregnant with Andrew, and so all of a sudden I began to panic, and so did Lori, because it looked like I was going to have to drop out of school. And at that time, due to the economy, the best option I probably had was working in a convenience store, and I
Mm-hmm.
knew we weren't going to make much money. And Lori was finishing up with her art education degree. She had to do her student teaching, so
Yeah.
there was no income going to come in from that. So my dad had an electrical business here, and
Mm-hmm.
he actually had two businesses. And one of his partners was killed tragically in a boating
Mm-hmm.
accident. And so when that happened, things kind of the workload spread out because he had a brother involved in the business, and that brother took over the other company. And so Daddy was spread over about 7 or 8 different states. He was doing a lot of work for the Howard Brothers uh,
Mm-hmm.
brand discount, I think is what they called them, and then Super Savers. And so they were just scattered. And so when that occurred, I already had an electrical
Mm-hmm.
degree, had my license. And so we realized that I could come back and work. And the plan was for me to come back part time. I was going to come back, work, and then get enough money together. And hopefully he'd kind of get things stabilized on his end. And then I was going to go on and finish my school, which I did not finish at U of H, and
Yeah.
then go on to seminary.
Mm.
Well, that never happened. And
Wow.
so we stayed here, and I worked in the business, kind of worked my way up through the business,
Mm-hmm.
became really to a point where I was running the business. My dad
Yeah.
had a stroke when he was 81.
Mm.
And so when that occurred, then everything fell to me to take care of it. And so I
Yeah.
did. So along the way, obviously we had Andrew when we were here, and then Christopher came along, and then
Mm-hmm.
Nicholas came along.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were living in Monroe, and I realized that I wanted to live out in the country because raising 3 boys, I already had a dream and a desire that they could
Yeah.
enjoy the country life. So we moved out there.
Yeah.
That caused us to leave First Baptist Monroe, which we had been a member there for 12 years and
Yeah.
heavily involved. And so we wound up at North Monroe
Yeah.
Church. And I was involved in the church a great deal. I
Mm-hmm.
participated in a lot of things. I was the chairman of deacons a couple times. I've taught
Mm-hmm.
life groups repeatedly.
Yeah.
Just kind of did the normal thing.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of our story
Yeah.
up to that point, and kind of led us to where
Well,
we are now.
and I can brag on you because, we grew up with Chris, and then Andrew taught our life group. Got to know him and Laura when they lived here, and I know Nick is the same way as well, even though he's younger than us. But um, it's just so evident that those times where you weren't doing, this public ministry, that you were really investing in your boys, because we've heard their testimonies. We've seen that in their life. We've seen the fruit. You and Miss Lori both just that I can tell that was your ministry in that time. Not totally, because you were very involved in the church, but it's just very evident. It's very encouraging to me as a parent. So I wanted to brag on y'all there as well. So where did that switch happen from you're running the business, this is wasn't expected, but become your life, to moving towards missions? How did that come about for y'all?
So someone gave me a book, and I really don't remember who it was, in 2012, and it was a book written by Francis Chan. It was called Crazy Love.
Mm.
And really, Crazy Love is just a series of testimonies of people that had surrendered their life to ministry. And I began to read the book and was really compelled by it, so much so that I probably read it 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
And it just really became a somewhat of a conviction for me that I saw things in these people's lives, like Pastor Bill talked about Dr. Brandt. He's in there, and
Yeah.
talked about the fact the surrender that he made to work with people that have leprosy, both
Hmm.
in overseas as well as in the state of Louisiana. And so it was just those kind of folks, and I saw a surrender that they had that I didn't have. And so God really began to work with me on that. And in 2014, a doctor named Kent Brandley was working for Samaritan's Purse, and they had an Ebola outbreak in Africa.
Hmm.
And so I knew about it. I was kind of monitoring and watching that just because there was a great deal of fear about Ebola coming to the United States.
Yeah.
And so it just so happened I was in our barn. We have horses, and I was feeding the horses at night. And when I did, there was a testimony that came on the radio, which was surprising because usually the radio stayed on the local country
Hmm.
station, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden here's a Dr. Brantley's wife giving testimony to the fact that at that point he had contracted Ebola. We knew he
Hmm.
did, and there was no cure for it.
Yeah.
And so she was talking about that they had made the decision to go and live in Liberia, knowing that the potential of their dying was a very real thing.
Yeah.
And so I heard that, and the more I heard her talk about the sacrifice they were prepared to make, it
Hmm.
just that coupled with me having read Crazy Love, having kind of walked some of that out, it just touched me to the point where I literally fell to my knees, and I told the Lord, I said, Jesus, whatever you call me to do, I'll do. And I think I'd come to that place in my life. One of the things that happens when we come to Christ,
Hmm.
we are what's called justified, which
Yeah.
means we come to that place where we have the righteousness of Christ. And so there was no question about my salvation, but I think this was a point of sanctification for me. I think this was
Hmm.
growing deeper.
Yeah.
And I kind of, even though I was involved in everything at the church, I think I was walking in the shallow water and God was calling me to deeper waters.
Mm.
Uh, Jeff Fitzgerald uses this term. He called it getting out of the boat.
Yeah.
And so he talks about how God called Peter out of the boat.
Yeah.
And so he says, that was because I was with Jeff when he was trying to make the decision, was he going to step out of the boat or not? Well,
Yeah.
that's pretty much where I found myself I was at that point.
Yeah.
What am I going to do here? And so I told the Lord, I said, if you call me to
Hmm.
anything, I'll go, whatever it is. Lori and I'll move, we'll leave, we'll
Hmm.
do whatever we got to do. And so that kind of just laid dormant in my life for a little bit until about 2 weeks after that time, my dad had a stroke, as I told you.
Hmm.
And so my mother called, said, "Hey, your daddy is not responsive. He's in the bed. I can't get him up. Would you come to the house?" And so I told her I would, and I did.
Hmm.
And when we got there, it was obvious what had taken place. He had had a severe stroke. We got an ambulance. They took him to the hospital. Laurie and I spent pretty much all day that Saturday there at the hospital.
Hmm.
And we were driving home that night. He was in a coma. He wasn't responsive at all.
Hmm.
And so we were driving home and we were talking about that we had to go back to the hospital on Sunday and what that was going to look like. And Lori said, "What do you think about us just not getting up, going to church?" And I said, "Well, at that point, they had just started the visitor center, and Laurie and I were the first two people that actually were working in the visitor center.
Hmm.
And I said, baby, they're dependent on us, and it's too late. It's already nighttime to get somebody to cover for us. Let's just go. We'll do that, and then we'll leave." And so she said, "Okay, that's what we'll do." So we went, and sure enough, David McCormick comes up, I mean, at the very outset, and
Hmm.
says, "Hey, I need to ask you something." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Would you go on a mission trip with me?" And I said, "Well, I need to talk to Lori, but yes, I will go." And so, because I knew
Hmm.
what I'd told the Lord. So I went, and we went to Honduras, which was my first mission trip.
Yeah.
And that was in 2014. And
Yeah.
that's really the start of everything. And that's how it all got
Mm.
going.
You use the phrase getting out of the boat, which is what you've probably felt like you've done over and over and over since that time. We've talked about this before. We talk about that story and Peter a lot on the podcast because that story speaks to me a lot. I actually have an illustration of that moment behind my desk in there, in my office, and we talk about Peter's words the next day. They're actually in John, but after he after Jesus says, I'm the bread of life, and, all of these things. And then some of his disciples leave, not the 12, but, it
Mhm.
says many walked away. And he turns and says, will y'all walk away as well? And Peter's famous words of, you have the words of eternal life. Where else would we go? And he says, for we have believed and have come to know. And we've talked about before how, where did he come to know that? And it was like, well, it's probably about 3 a.m. when he stepped out of the boat,
Right.
because you can believe something, but when you step out, you come to know things in your bones that you could just believe in theory. What has that looked like for you? What are some of those things that seemed really scary getting out of the boat, maybe, or maybe it didn't? I don't know how you felt, but that you have come to know about who God is and what he's doing in the world.
So for me, probably one of the first things that occurred is I was scared to death to go on a mission trip. I was afraid that I would uh, become a victim. I thought that I probably would get over to a foreign country and someone would, all those things you hear,
Yeah.
a terrorist act,
Mhm.
whatever. And so that was probably the thing that I was most afraid of when it
Mhm.
came to me stepping out of the boat and going into missions.
Yeah.
None of that happened, obviously. And
Mhm.
what really occurred was a really neat thing. There was an older gentleman named Tom Smith who still goes to North Monroe.
Mm.
And Tom, uh, he had been on a number of mission trips. He'd been doing it for about 30 years at that point. And Tom just made everything comical. I mean, he just had story after story, and it absolutely
Mhm.
captivated me so much so that when we were flying home that night from after the trip was over,
Mhm.
I walked up to Tom on the plane and I said, "Where can we go next?"
Yeah.
Because it was just like I was hooked, and I knew that that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Mm.
And so that really was the point.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of fear that
Mhm.
turned out to be very unrealized,
Mm.
and I see that in people now.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, one of the things that I'm really working on in my ministry is to be very sensitive to that,
Mm.
because I tend to take that lightly now because I've done this for so long.
Yeah.
But it is a very real thing for people to be fearful, and
Right.
I know we had a situation just this year where some people got extremely fearful of what was going on in Africa in the way of a disease, and
Mhm.
it just turned into a whole thing there for a brief period. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just have to be sensitive to the fact that
Mm.
fear is a real thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Peter was fearful, obviously, when he stepped out,
Mhm.
and then he took his eyes off Jesus. He sinks below, and
Yeah.
like you said, the
Yeah.
Lord reaches down and gets him, and at that point, he knows. There's
Yeah.
no doubt.
Right. Yeah. And I always think it's so gracious that he actually fell because um I guess I'd try to say fell and failed at the same time, but that he fell and Jesus immediately reached out, because how much worse would have been for him to think it was in his power
Mm,
that he's doing what he's doing,
mm.
and so even that, there's so much grace. About how often do you and Miss Lori travel out of the year?
So last year we traveled about 100 days.
Yeah.
It looks like this year will probably be about the same. The
Hmm.
summer's coming, and actually we start in May, and things do not end for me until November.
Hmm.
And so it probably is about 100 days out of the year
Yeah. Yeah.
as an average.
Yeah. And how did it come to be where you fell in love with missions? Okay, what's our next trip? And you being the international missions pastor.
Well, so in 2019, I was traveling, I was volunteering and
Hmm.
traveling with David McCormick quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so he and I were in Cuba,
Hmm.
and we were together. It was just the two of us. And David said, "Joy, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I really feel like God's calling me to step away from North Monroe. He's calling me to go into a different form of missions in the
Hmm.
United States."
Hmm.
And so I said, "Okay, what does that mean?" And he said, "Well," he said, "really, I'd like for you to pray about, would you like to step up and take this? Because nobody knows what's going on more than you do." And he
Yeah.
said, "I hadn't had any discussion with Pastor Bill. I hadn't had any discussion with anyone. You're actually, other than Shelley, you're the first person I've told this to."
Hmm.
And so I said, "Okay." So I had been praying about what God was doing with me. I actually was working with another mission organization also called XMA.
Hmm.
And so I had sort of been approached by them about taking a larger role. It would have
Yeah.
been it would have been where I had to do the self-funding. I would have had to go out and raise my own support.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a little bit complicated for me, being that I was in the electrical business and all. So
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how that would look like. But when David asked that, then suddenly I kind of began to realize that that was what probably God was calling me to do.
Mm-hmm.
That got validated for me because that same year, Lori and I were teaching a young married Sunday school class.
Mm-hmm.
And so the men's ministry and the women's ministry was just getting really going. I think maybe it might have started in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And so there'd been a couple trips and we'd seen the success of that. And so I told Lori, I said, what do you think about us stepping out and paying for anybody in our class that wants to go, whether they're male or female?
Mm-hmm.
And so she agreed. And so we offered it to our group. Had about 6 or 7 guys that agreed to go. And I think there were like 5 women that said that they would go on one of the trips. And so Greg Manley happened to be the director of that, the men's portion of that. And so I went to Greg and explained what I was trying to do. And he said, well, that's not exactly how we do this. And I said, yeah, I understand. I said, but I really want these guys to get to go. And he said, well, let me see if we can make room. And I said, okay. And so he did. And he came back to me and he said, how about you? And I said, well, I wasn't really planning on going. I was planning on just sending them. And he said, yeah, but you need to go too. So I did. And so at that men's retreat, not to give any of the details away, because I know there's secretive rules that we're not supposed to talk about, but
Yeah.
that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there was a group of young men who actually, most of them, I think, were deacons, who had come to me and said, we just really feel compelled. We need to pray for you. Is there something we can pray for you about? And I told them, I said, well, I'm considering missions, and there's just a lot of things that go with that. One of them is Lori was very fearful about what that would look like in our life. And so they said, okay. So those men gathered around me and they laid their hands on me and began to pray.
Yeah.
And when they did, I've not had anything like this since, but I just began to shake uncontrollably. They didn't know that.
Yeah.
So it was a shaking that was occurring inside me, so much so that I couldn't even sleep. I really couldn't talk to anybody. I just perceived that it was the Holy Spirit at work in me. You know, I've gone back and studied Scripture, and if you look, when the church in Antioch decided they were going to send Paul and Barnabas out, they laid hands on them.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a lot of that same kind of a deal. Those guys had no idea what they were doing. They were just acting out of guidance from the Holy Spirit, I think, and I certainly was. And so at that point, I kind of knew I'd been set apart for a very specific role. And to answer your question, how do we know where we go? That's a really good question, because what happened is we're now working in between 17 and 19 countries.
Yeah.
And we never anticipated that. That's never been anything. Bill didn't go to me and suddenly say, Joey, I want you to go find 17 countries to go to. If anything, he's told me you're doing too much.
Yeah.
And so but what happens is God just keeps opening these doors. Yeah. I mean, we're working in some closed countries that I never would have thought we'd gotten the opportunity to get into. But God's just opened those doors and opened those opportunities. And it happens much like when you read the book of Acts. I mean, how did Paul know how to go to Macedonia? Well, a man called him to go to Macedonia. Well, there's a great deal of discussion. Was it a real man? Was it a vision? What was that? Well, I don't know. But I can tell you, we're in Bangladesh. I never anticipated going to Bangladesh. Didn't even really know where Bangladesh was until suddenly I had a guy come to me and say, hey, look, you're teaching the book of Romans. And he said, I've got a friend who's reached out to me from Bangladesh, and he's asking, would you consider him just receiving the material? And he'll translate it, and he wants to use it in his ministry. I said, sure. So that's turned into us doing Zoom with them. And now we've got 2 different groups of men at North Monroe. One is a group of 6, and another's a group of 4 that are teaching by Zoom in Bangladesh. These guys never leave their home. They are doing this from their home, but they've made the sacrifice to be up at midnight on a Friday night, which is 12 o'clock on a Saturday morning for them, and they're teaching these guys. And what we've seen from that is we've seen people coming to Christ
Mm,
I know Thomas McCalla is teaching a group, and
mm.
Thomas didn't even know that this was going on, but they've had 8 people come to Christ. They just had 8 baptisms, and they send me all the pictures because they had asked me. They
Yeah.
said, "Look, could you tune in and watch this live?" And I said, "What time is that?" And they said, "Well, it's 2 o'clock our time." I said, "Well, that's 2 o'clock my time on a Saturday night, and I have to get up
Yeah.
and work at church." And I said, "So how about y'all just video it and give it to me?" So they did.
Yeah.
I sent it to Thomas, and Thomas said, "We had no idea." And I said,
Mhm.
"I know." And that's just the stuff God's doing.
Wow.
And so it's just been amazing to see how God's used that.
Yeah.
But we never set out to do that.
What's been the hardest part of living on mission? Anything unexpected?
You know, Lori and I talk about this a lot. It is the sacrifice that we make and our family makes on our
Mhm.
behalf.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, we have 6 grandchildren.
Mhm.
Uh, actually, I say I have 6 grandchildren here on earth. I have 8 in heaven who,
Mhm.
for one reason or another, died in
Yeah.
prematurely.
Yeah.
And so the we don't make a lot of the birthdays. We don't make the holidays. I know when
Yeah.
we can, we're at those recitals and things with
Mhm.
little girls. There's a lot of little recitals that you go
Mhm.
to,
Yeah.
and so we it's just a real sacrifice in that
Yeah.
regard. And I don't think Lori and I didn't anticipate that. We didn't realize how that was happening, and it's growing as the kids are getting older.
Yeah.
They're getting more involved in activities,
Right.
and so there's always, "Hey, have you got time to come to this?" Well, if you're gone 100 days out of the year, you're going to miss probably a third of what they're doing or a half of what they're doing, and
Yeah.
so it's just hard. It's just really
Yeah.
difficult,
Yeah.
and so I think for us
Mhm.
that's the thing that probably caught us off guard the most.
Right. Yeah. It's, you know, we've talked about this before, even just in your work as motherhood, like you can be doing exactly what you're called to do, um, and be grateful for it. But the blessing does not necessarily dispel hardship, and like there's a weightiness to walking in your calling, even if it's where you're supposed to be. But I love that you also pointed out the fruitfulness of what's coming to be in those places, and I know also that your family feels loved by y'all and loves, what y'all are doing as well. Um, what things have you loved? What's been your favorite parts about missions and just the ministry that y'all are doing?
Well, the thing that I love the most about missions, when I first went on my first mission trip, I perceived that I was bringing something to a group of people that they didn't have.
Mm,
And that's not been true.
mm,
What's actually been true is they're blessing me as much or more than I'm able to possibly bless them.
yeah.
Now, we do bring education and we bring training that they otherwise don't have, but
Hmm.
the spirit that they have and just the loving way that they
Yeah.
care for us. As y'all may be aware, there's been a tremendous earthquake in Myanmar,
Yeah.
and so we've been working in Myanmar since 2019. So we got the notice, Friday was a week ago, that there'd been a bad earthquake.
Hmm.
And we have an orphanage there that has 36 children. We have 23 that we have a school there where we disciple and train
Yeah.
leaders in. So we have a total of 65 people in just this one location.
Yeah.
And so they start making contact with us and telling us and sending pictures of how
Mm,
the walls are down, the roof is falling in.
mm,
They have no water. They went for a whole day without any water. And I happen to know you can't live but 3 days without water, and
yeah.
so we're upset about that. But here's the neat thing that happens: is we were able to reach out to all of our brothers in
Hmm.
Christ around the world, and
Yeah.
immediately they began to pray,
Mm,
and so we just saw God move, and I mean, it was just neat to watch. Like I told you, that they didn't have water initially. They have a well, but there was
mm,
no way to extract the water out of the ground.
yeah.
Well, a person gets in contact with them who knows the story of what's going on there.
Yeah.
They've got a little generator. They loan them the generator enough to get the water tank filled up daily, and then
Yeah.
they take the generator back. And so from that, they contacted us and they said, "Could you send some money?" I wasn't sure how we'd get money to them because the infrastructure's just totally
Mm,
been tore down. And so we sent $500 initially. I told Laura, I said, if we lose $500, we just lose $500. Let's see what happens, because you
Mm.
have to send it by Western Union.
Yeah.
Well, they received that $500, and now that $500 is turned into about $11,000 that we've been able to send.
Mm.
And what's come of this is the people that we have that work in Myanmar, it's a
Mm.
husband and his wife are the primary ones that work there.
Yeah.
And so they have taken and they've been able to start feeding people and caring for people. Now, as of yesterday, Samaritan's Purse finally arrived. Franklin Graham has been trying to get his medical team in there
Mm.
for a week, but due to the constriction of what's going on there, they're in the middle of a civil war. The military is in charge of the areas that was hit by the earthquake, and the military they want total control.
Mm.
So they were preventing any organization from coming in. But the
Yeah.
neat part about this is North Monroe was already there.
Mm.
And so God's been using that. And at the start of the year, we had a sportsman's banquet that just was miraculous. We had about $400,000 to
Yeah.
work with. And so I sat down and uh, put together a budget. And when I did, I told Laurie, I said, I'm going to set aside about $25,000 for disaster relief, because there's always somebody needing help,
Yeah.
and we're always coming up short, or we're having to ask people. And
Mhm.
so we're putting that to work. And
Yeah.
right now, we're able to meet the needs. We're sending about $3,000 a week. They just sent pictures of buying rice. They went out into areas and
Mhm.
they're taking water and rice and delivering it. And they're caring for those people. They cooked meals
Mm.
and fed 700 people one day. They have this huge pot
Yeah.
that they just sit there, and of course you can make fire. And
Mhm.
so they've got a big fire going, and
Mhm.
they make this rice and put it into containers, and they pass it out. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't have access to clean water. They've been able to buy water thus far.
Yeah.
So it's just been neat to see how God's just been using that and how that's all kind of taken place.
And you can sit in comfort, totally connected, totally disconnected from that, and that feeling surreal, and feel like, if I give this $20, what's it gonna do? If I give this $100,000, whatever you're able to give, like, what's it really gonna help? Is it really gonna get to anybody? Is it really gonna do any? But getting to hear stories like that is encouraging for the person that's like, I can't physically go for whatever reason at this time, but I can contribute, and like, look at what that's done. Look at
Right.
what the Lord's done with that generosity. If anybody hears that and it's like, hey, I want to help, and how can they get involved as far as sending?
Just simply make a donation to North
Yeah.
Monroe and just
Yeah.
put missions on it.
Yeah.
Every penny that
Mm-hmm.
is given goes. There is no
Mm-hmm.
administration
Yeah.
charges. There's no administration fee associated with what we do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Mhm.
just make contact with North Monroe and just
Yeah.
tell them, hey, I want to give to missions, and they can.
That's wonderful.
One of the things that Laurie does, and she doesn't ever get enough credit for the role that she plays,
Yeah.
but Laurie, with her God-given artistic ability, she is constantly putting together videos for us.
Yeah.
She's decorating. We have a mission store. The
Uh-huh.
mission store is intended to help educate people about what North Monroe does with missions, but it also helps there is any of the proceeds that are made, we put it right back into
Yeah.
things that give us the opportunity. And so we've used some of that money to try to help with some of that also.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's just multiple ways that people can help and
Mhm.
people can be a part of. But, there's a story in the Bible that talks about Elijah, and Elijah comes up on the widow.
Mhm.
And I'm always fascinated by the fact how God directed him to this one widow who was not even a Jew.
Mhm.
And so he tells her, I want you to make me a cake. Well, she doesn't have but just enough flour and enough oil to make a cake for her son. And her preparation was, we're going to die.
Yeah.
Well, every day she comes back and the oil still remains there. And so Laurie was talking to me this morning before I left the house, and because they communicate with us at night,
Yeah.
which is funny because like at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
we'll hear the phone going off, and it's like, yep, that's our partners. They're trying to communicate with us and sending us pictures, and they send thousands of pictures.
Yeah.
And so we when I got up this morning, Lori said, well, all the rice came in because they had been buying 50-pound bags of rice.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, well, that's good. That's good. That'll last for a while. And she said, they gave it all away. And I said, well, okay. And so she said, Joey, she said, I keep trying to explain to them how we've got to spread this out. And I said,
Yeah.
I understand,
Yeah.
but they're seeing the need. And
Yeah.
the need is so great, they can't not give it all away.
Yeah.
And that's who they are.
Yeah.
And so I told Laurie, I said, we've just got to pray that God just keeps that oil jar full.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's going to take is
right.
It's just going to, for us to meet the needs and try to help and do what we can.
Yeah. It's so good. What, I'm curious because we've heard in your story, you've done ministry a long time. You know, you did youth, you've done lots of ministry inside the church and a lot of different aspects as far as service with deacon work, but also teaching and young couples, your own family. How has living on mission changed the way you do ministry everywhere? How has that changed the way you are a bondservant of Christ? How has your mindset changed even when you're here?
Well, and I don't think it does change.
Mm.
To be honest with you, we're always on mission.
Yeah.
All of us are. And, I have people come up to me all the time at church and they'll say, thank you for what you do. And we're so pleased. And God's got, I have these older people that'll tell me, you must have so many jewels in your crown. And I think, and I'll tell them all the same thing. I'm not doing a thing different than you do. I do it in different places, but we're all called to mission. We're all called to serve.
Yeah.
And so the thing that God really has been dealing with me the most about is when I am here to take time and to be here and to do missions. Because like we had a young man who went on mission with us for the first time this last year. And so I met him and really I met him on mission because actually I was traveling from Nicaragua to get to Honduras, which was quite an ordeal because I had to go through 2 sets of customs. I don't speak a lot of Spanish. And they stranded me there for about 2 hours. And I'm on the phone with Laurie trying to explain, hey, you might start praying because like I've got these truckers all really looking at me trying to figure out how much they can get out of me.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I met him when I finally got to the location where we were doing the work. And so he and I became friends, and he asked me, he said, look, would you disciple me? And I said, absolutely. And so we started, and he and I have been going through some discipleship material, which is both good for he and I, because it's really been deep, and it's caused me to just rethink the way that I do missions or do ministry, even when I'm here. So it's not just something that I do when I'm away, it's something I do all the time. And so I think if I were to answer that question properly, I would say all of us need to be looking around. What's the opportunity? Henry Blackaby says that what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to find where God's at work and go get in on it. Yeah. Well, he's always at work.
Right.
He's at work all around us. And so I look forward to those opportunities. And what's been happening with those that we take on missions, matter of fact, we've just run across some material to help people take with them so that they can journal while they go, because I want their experience to be greater. I want them to come away and to realize how God's used them. He's used you in a powerful way.
Yeah.
And it's life-changing. It's amazing how many people we see that will go on missions and they'll come back and they say, I'm changed.
Yeah.
I'm a different person. And I almost think it's a part of the discipleship process for them to get to go, because I think it takes you outside your comfort zone. It puts you in a place where maybe you don't speak the language, but yet you can still communicate. You can still tell people what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's been a really important thing, even for me, because now I'm realizing that I have such a role that I need to play when I'm back here. And when I say back here, I mean here in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just about rest. It's not just about, well, let's catch up and let's get our rest because we've got to go on another trip.
Yeah.
There's things and there's opportunities I need to take advantage of.
Right. Well, I hope y'all are getting rest too, though, because y'all do need that. It takes it out of you.
I'm 66 years old, and so I had a friend who actually discipled me, is my same age,
Mm.
wrote me the other day, and he said, shared with me Psalm 90, verse 12, which talks about number your days
Mhm.
so that you may offer up a heart of wisdom back to God. And that really got me to thinking. And so I remember when I accepted the role to do this, I was 60 years old when Pastor Bill asked me to take this over.
Mhm.
And so I prayed to God and I said, would you give me 20 years, which will take me to age 80, which is
Mm.
pretty close to the same age at which my dad had his stroke. And,
Mm.
80 kind of tends to be
Mm.
an age. I don't know if it's an important age, but
Yeah.
it's a point.
Yeah.
And so I sat down and I've now calculated that I have 4,962 days until I have my 80th birthday.
Mm.
And so I journal when I have my quiet time. So I've been writing down and subtracting a day.
Wow.
And I've been trying to do that because I want to be purposeful with
Mm.
each day that comes up.
Yeah.
And that's what my friend really challenged me to, is he said, let's you and I finish strong.
Mm.
And, that's the thing I want more than anything else. And I see that whether you're talking to Pastor Bill, he's trying to
Mhm.
finish out his ministry and decide how he's going to finish strong. Warren Eckhart is
Mhm.
70. Warren's trying to figure it. Kenneth, all the
Yeah.
people at our church
Yeah.
who are of the older age we're
Mhm.
trying to figure it out. Now, I'm a little tired of the younger ones keep calling us old, which, we're not, we're not going to put up with that.
Wise.
Yeah, well, that would be better. I like the word wise much better than old. I took Jordy to Africa with me, and then we went on to India after that. And he kept calling me old man. And I told Laura, I said, he says it one more time, I'm going to do something to him. I don't know what.
That's right. You got to show him that you
Well,
can
I don't.
still whip him.
I'm good for
Yeah.
about 15 seconds. So yeah, it's going to happen quick. So
Only because you're so wise, though.
right there,
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
So
That's right.
yeah. Um, what do you wish that everyone knew about missions? Is there any misconceptions that you run into?
Uh, yeah, I think the major misconception is that we in this culture we feel like we have it all together,
Mhm.
and it's so amazing how we don't.
Yeah.
And when you go abroad, and when you go there, you experience God in a whole fresh new way.
Yeah.
Uh, I was sharing actually with the life group, if you remember, how
Yeah.
I was afraid to raise my hands in worship.
Mm.
And so, it really was a problem for me because I thought, well, everybody's going to look at me. Everybody's going to
Mm.
think something, Joey's gone a little to the charismatic side or whatever. And so I learned in Africa how to worship because
Mm.
I watched them and how they worship. They worship all over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they have moves that I don't have without a doubt, but they
Yeah.
literally they're very expressive in their worship, and
Mm.
I think that's something they've taught me, and I
Mm.
wish that we could bring some of that back.
Mm.
Jordy, as I said, was with me in Uganda, and
Yeah.
so at the end of our teaching, they asked, could they pray for us? And so we
Mm.
said, well, sure, of course you can. Well, they prayed all in unison, all at the same time.
Mm.
And Jordy was just in tears. And he told
Mm.
me, he said, Joey, do you realize what's going on here? And he said, these people, they don't even know anything about us other than they've been with us for the last 2.5 days.
Yeah.
But he said, listen to their prayers. Listen
Mhm.
to how committed they are. He said, we don't have that. He said, I wished I
Mhm.
could take that and
Yeah.
carry it back to our church and
Mhm.
teach our people how to pray like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part
Mhm.
of what is taking place. One of the neat things that you get to do when
Yeah.
you go on mission is you get to sit on a front row seat and see God at work.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing to
Mhm.
see. He's working in Africa, he's working in Southeast Asia, he's working in the Middle East, just like he's
Yeah.
working here at home. And
It seems like uh, this has probably been 5, 6, 7 years ago. Y'all had someone in, you were hosting a missionary, I think maybe at your home, and they said something interesting about prayer. I believe it was I don't know if it was a,
it was Justin and Ann Newbergazy.
yes. And you might want to just tell the story because I'm probably going to mess it up, but they talked about the feeling of their prayers here as opposed to when they were gone. Can you kind of tell us that story if you feel comfortable?
They said they didn't feel like their prayers were ascending any further than the ceiling of my house. They
Mm,
said, we feel like there's almost a covering or a shield
mm,
that in America that prohibits our prayers, where we feel more freely in our prayers
mm,
when we're abroad. And that's caused them to pray for us.
mm.
They feel the need to pray for us in here
Yeah.
in America. And
Why do you think that is?
I think we're too comfortable.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that happens in this country is we get very comfortable, and we're
Yeah.
comfortable in who we are in God. And Bill talks about, there's a book in which a guy uses this illustration. I want my 5 pounds of God, and
Mm,
so that's all I want. And
yeah.
don't give me any more. Well, I think in America we're very comfortable with giving me just a little 5 pound sack of
Mhm,
Jesus Christ, and I experience that on Sunday. I go to
mm.
worship. I do the appropriate cultural thing, especially in the South. We're in the
Yeah.
Bible Belt still,
Right.
and so we tend to take for granted the
Mhm.
things that they don't. In Africa, they literally are in search of food every day.
Yeah.
Well, we don't worry about that. I mean,
Mm,
I've got freezers full of food right now. And
mhm,
so there's grocery stores that are readily accessible, and we always
mhm,
have access to food. They don't. So they're more dependent on God than we are.
mhm.
And I do think that's a big part of what goes on
Yeah.
in regards to us versus, say, the countries we're working in.
I promise I'm not going to keep you all day, but I want to ask this question. How do we combat that? If we're living here and this is our culture and we don't have that need, how do we combat that and still live on mission as if this is the reason we're here in this time in history is to make his name known?
One of the things that's happening at North Monroe, and I know this goes to other places other than North Monroe, but
Mhm.
one of the things that's happening is we're becoming more intentional about our discipleship. We're becoming
Mhm.
more intentional about our pouring ourselves into others. And if
Mhm.
I become more other centered, then that takes the view and the focus off of me.
Yeah.
And when I take the focus off of me, it's always better. One of the things that our partners in Myanmar made the comment,
Yeah.
and she wrote this morning, and she said, I'm just so thankful to God, and I'm so joyful inside that I get to go do this. And she was thanking North Monroe
Mm.
for giving them the financial means to purchase the rice, to travel 45 minutes to get to a village to take food where they haven't had food in a week.
Mm.
Well, suddenly their center and their focus is not on them, it's not on their problems, which it was a week ago.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden their focus is on others. And I think for us at the church, for us here in America, if we can take our focus off ourselves and put our focus on others,
Yeah.
I think it changes everything. That's what Jesus called us to do,
Right.
is to,
Yeah.
uh, we call it uh, sharing God's love in a practical way. And
Mhm.
so, if North Monroe grew
Yeah.
in 2016, and what occurred in 2016 is we had a tremendous flood.
Right.
And that flood caused us to get outside our comfort zone. And
Mhm.
suddenly, like for myself, I was going to work at 7 o'clock in the morning, getting off at 3:30 in the afternoon, going by the church, changing, putting on a pair of dirty clothes, and I was going and tearing sheetrock out. So was
Mhm.
everybody else.
Yeah.
And then I
We were
know,
strapping on babies and making
well,
plates
y'all
and,
were making plates and
yeah.
cooking
Yeah.
and all that and passing out food.
Mhm.
North Monroe grew exponentially at that time.
Mhm.
And it did because we became other centered. And so
Mhm.
that's happened multiple times in our church.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. If we can become other centered and just take our focus off ourselves,
Yeah.
uh, it's not about me.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
love to sit around at different places in the church.
Yeah.
I sat the other day in what I think is Sharon and Benny Evans' usual spot. And so when I did, uh, Benny kind of walked up and he stood there, and Lori goes, I think we're sitting in Benny's spot. And I said, okay, I'll move. That's fine.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I never know. And so anyway, I told your dad
Yeah.
afterwards, I said, I am so sorry. And he said, for what? And he said, I was sitting in your spot. He said, oh, that's okay. I sit wherever Sharon is anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I said, well, yeah, but I think I was in her spot too. And so my point is,
Yeah.
I love to just sit
Yeah.
wherever
Yeah.
and meet other people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I wind up sitting in somebody's quote unquote unnamed assigned seating, right?
That's part of your job here is to shake up the culture
I guess
when you're
so.
here in our, yeah.
I guess. Because I don't know when I'm sitting in, Lori
That's
just
so
punched
funny.
me and she said, I
Yeah.
think this is not where we're supposed to be sitting. And I said, well, didn't know,
No.
I'm
I
innocent.
can speak for both of them.
No,
For
they
people who
didn't
don't know,
care.
that's my parents. Yeah.
No, not at all. That's not your mom and dad at all.
No.
But it was funny because I did tell your dad that afterwards, and he
Yeah.
goes, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I
Yeah.
go, oh, yeah, you do. I
He
know you do.
he probably really doesn't care. That's hilarious. Well, man, there are 1,000 questions that I could ask you, and we'll probably hunt you down again, so we can do that. But mostly, just thank you so much for taking time out of your day and coming to share with us. And I know we only scratched the surface, but it was really good.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate it.
We appreciate you.
Thanks for coming.
Good. Thank you.
And thank y'all so much for listening in to the Saltworks this week. We will see you next week.
This is my story. This is your story.